Okay, this question is about resistance to authority. So it's in the Social Psychology, paper 1, and for AQA Psychology, and for mock feedback, but also just if you get an essay question on resistance or defiance or disobedience. Okay, so the question is outline and evaluate, and for ours it was only 8 marks. But this will also talk you through if you need more marks, so 12 mark or a 16 marker. Okay, so resistance in the spec talks about social support and also locus of control. So social support being a situational factor, locus of control being a dispositional factor. So what do we need to cover? Right, so we need to outline these 2 key areas. So factors affecting resistance, you need to also be able to explain, develop these and link them, keep linking them to defiance, disobedience, resistance. Okay, any of those terms, make sure you have those in. So first of all, exposure to dissenters or social support to disobey. Okay, be able to explain why does that affect our obedience or disobedience? Because it forces us to question, it puts us into the autonomous state as opposed to the agentic state. And in the autonomous state, we have to take responsibility. We know that we can't deny responsibility. So looking at social support, other people around us who are dissenting will force us into that state. Okay, also locus of control. We know that high internal locus of control makes us believe that we determine our own outcomes, so we're more likely to be resistant. Being in the autonomous state specifically means we take responsibility, as mentioned already, and also no perceived authority. If there's no authority in close proximity, it means we can't deny responsibility. So those are different factors that we would start with depending on how many marks, but I would suggest these 2 if it's just an 8 marker to develop and then give examples and then evaluate, okay, and the others if you need more. So a bit of extra previous experience of dissenting, so for example the Olliner and Olliner research, or morality, so Milgram's research, where he had one person who was a vicar who reported in a post-study interview that he had to obey his higher authority, in other words his God, and that helped him resist. Also, we could include systematic processing, so if we have time to process what the order, we're less likely to obey. So Martin, for example, Martin et al. Found if participants were allowed to and encouraged to consider an unreasonable order, they were more likely to resist. So these are extras. Start with these 2 first and stick with that if it's an 8 marker. Go on if you need more. But let's have a look at the evidence evaluation. So if we're going with social support to disobey, use the Milgram scenario with the 2 Confederates. One dropped out at 150 volts, the other 210, and only 10% continued all the way up to 450 volts. So it seems that they provide moral support for us. They allow us to give our own response, the freedom of our own response. That it forces us into the autonomous state as well. So we could have that, or we could have exposure to disobedient models using the Mullen study. And Mullen found that participants were more likely to jaywalk, in other words, illegally cross the road in the US, when they had other peers basically doing the same thing than when they weren't exposed to those peers jaywalking. If we're going to use locus of control, use Holland. Holland repeated Milgram's research and assessed if participants were internals or high internal locus of control or high external locus of control. What he found was 37% of the high internals did not continue to 450 volts, compared with 23% of the externals who did go to 450 volts. So he believes that high internals were better able to resist pressures. And it seems that if we believe we have control of our own lives, our destiny, then we're more likely to question orders given by somebody, and we're less likely to blindly obey. You could also use proximity of authority. So for example again in Milgram's research, when the experimenter leaves the room, the authority figure leaves the room, obedience dropped just down to 20.5%. Again, if there's no authority there, it forces us to question who is responsible, and it forces us into this autonomous position. So we would want to, obviously we've got our evaluation in terms of research to support it. We might also go on to develop that with practical application. It's really important to be able to educate pupils, children in schools to the dangers of blind obedience, for example. And you could develop it even further with the limitations of some of the research. For example, the ethics of Milgram's work, so protection from harm. And obviously, because there were ethical issues at that time with that sort of research, it does mean that we are very limited in replicating it. And if we can't replicate it, it's harder to verify it. It's harder to verify its validity. So we could use those general evaluation points. So going back, outline and evaluate, depends on how many marks it is. Start off with social support, start off with locus of control, outline those, developing and explaining how they link to resistance, give some research to support it, and obviously evaluate. And if you need a little bit extra, go on to the extra points.